That morning did not start out any different than any other morning. I would have awakened to the sound of the alarm clock, and Tracy and I would have rolled out of bed, and we would have began our day as we typically do. We like to go in and take about 15 minutes and sip coffee and watch the weather on television and see how to dress for the day. That day would have started just like that. And then we would have gotten dressed, and I would have probably filled up my Yeti mug that one of our boys bought me, purchased for me, and with black coffee. And then I would have headed off to work after giving Trace a hug or a kiss or something like that, and started my day. And during that time, I was serving as one of our detectives with the police department over in Calhoun, and I did that for, I was in the uniform division for about 30 plus years, and then spent 10 and a half years as one of our detectives. But I would have walked in on that Monday morning. It was a Monday morning, if I recall correctly. I would have walked in, and I would have sat down in the easy chair, and reared back, still sipping on my Yeti mug, my coffee. Well, the boss man walked by, and all of the reports that's come in over the weekend that's going to be assigned to us, he handed me one, and he said, "Kev, this one looks like a good one for you." And I looked at it, and it said burglary. And in Georgia, a thumbnail definition is when someone enters a structure dwelling owned by you or someone else without permission and without authority with the intent to steal something. That's burglary. It's a felony. And that's what this report was about. And I looked at the neighborhood, and it was in one of our higher end neighborhoods. Then I began to read the narrative of the report, and basically it was a family of four, mom and dad, a couple of young teenage 13, 14-year-old boys, and they had left the previous week and went to Florida on vacation. Well, after about a week's time, they had come back that Saturday before I'm sitting there at my desk on Monday, 2 days later, and they found their house broken into. So they called us, and one of our patrol officers goes out and takes a report. And I noticed that the mother's jewelry had been taken. The son's Xbox games had been taken along with the controls and all of that. And also the dad had a little plastic jar, maybe a couple $100 worth of change taken. So I looked at that. Well, I made my way out to my unmarked SUV, and I rode over to the neighborhood. And any good officer, any good detective is always looking to see if they can find what I like to call the Gladys Kravitz of the neighborhood. Now, some of you are nodding your head and you're smiling, so you know who Gladys Kravitz was, that nosy neighbor of Darren and Samantha Stevens on that television show back in the day called Bewitched. We're always looking for someone like that. Well, I pull into this nice neighborhood, and before I get down to the cul-de-sac where this house is at, I find this house on the right-hand side of the road, and it looked occupied. There was maybe a car in the driveway, a light was on, and I thought, I'll just start here. Well, I pulled in the driveway, and I was dressed appropriately with my nice little shirt with my embroidered badge, and I had my ID cards with me. Well, as soon as I pulled in, I seen a head pop up in the window, and I thought, well, that's a pretty good sign. And it was the lady of the house. So I got out and introduced myself, gave her my card, and told her why I was there. And she said, I knew it. She said, last Tuesday, that morning, said I was watching The Price is Right. And she said there was a green, about a 1979 Model Ford pickup truck short bed with no hubcaps going right down our street. And she said, and it don't belong in our neighborhood. I thought, Mrs. Kravitz, of course that wasn't her name. I thought, you're my new best friend. And she said, I started to call 911 right then. And I was really amazed that the lady of the home could say a 79. I said, ma'am, tell me how you knew what your model and no hubcap. She said, well, my second husband, she said, we used to run a painting business. And she said, that was about the year models of the truck. She said, I always said we had white trucks. And she said, they was longer. I said, yes, ma'am, that's a long bed. She said, yeah, that was short. She said, short bed. I said, right. And she said, no hubcaps. And she said, and I just knew about what year model it was because I used to have to buy all of our tags. And I thought, well, that makes sense. And so See, people like her is the kind of person, and you women are better at this than us men. She's the kind that could be on the phone talking to another Gladys Kravitz across town and have three things on the stove going, something in the oven, The Price is Right on television, the washer and dryer going, and the kids playing, and could still spot a green truck going down the street. We love people like that. She said, but I'll tell you something. She said, if the business like that starts up in our neighborhood, she said, I'm calling the chief. She said, we're going to have to get us a neighborhood watch. And I thought, Mrs. Kravitz, you are the neighborhood watch. But I didn't tell her that. So I worked my way back up to the office, and I'm getting to my point here. I made my way back to the office. Back in the day, you would have to go around, let's say you go to the pawn shops and look for the Xbox games and look for jewelry. You had to personally go out. But now most places require a pawn location as part of their business license. They have to go online because, everything can be found here now. And they have to go online, and if somebody comes in to pawn, let's say that Brother Tommy goes down and he's going to, I'm just making an example, he's going to sell or pawn this songbook. Well, they'll take a picture of the songbook, the pawn dealer does, and he'll take a picture of Tommy, and Tommy has to put his driver's license down, and they take a picture of that, and they get some miscellaneous information, and it takes about a minute, and they load that into their system. That's part of the agreement that the pawn dealers has to do to get a license through the city. Well, it only takes a minute, and it's loaded on the system, into their system. Well, we have access at our desk, the detectives do. We just go online, pull up our local pawn dealer category, and we just start looking. Well, when I get back to the office, I'm still sipping on my mug of coffee. And I pull that thing up, and I go back to that date. Boop. That Tuesday evening, there is at a local pawn shop, the Xbox equipment. It's pawned by Mr. X, we'll say. And ladies' jewelry. I pull up his picture, his driver's license, his address, and I thought, boy, this was going to be simple. So I get back out of my SUV and I drive over to the neighborhood where this address is. Guess what's sitting in the front yard, in the driveway? A green 1979 Ford F-150 pickup truck, short bed, no hubcaps. Mrs. Kravitz was spot on. And I could have got out and knocked on the door, and Teresa and our boys is always telling me, you've been doing this too long, quit being brave. And so I didn't get out and knock on the door. I just went back and I called, and we have a way of looking up phone numbers. I looked his number up and I called, and the lady of the house answered. Told her who it was, told her why I was calling, not everything, but I said, does so-and-so live there? Yes, he does, and why are you calling? I said, well, ma'am, I'll talk to him about that. I said, now we can do this the hard way, or we can do this the easy way. I said, I'm sitting here in my chair. Can he come see me? Will he agree to come see me? Yes, he'll be there. Can I come? Yes, you can. So in 15 minutes, they show up. She sits in the lobby, and he comes in. And I said, sir, have a seat. He's the man sitting there. And I said, sir, before we talk, I said, I got to tell you something. I said, you have the right to remain silent. I said, everything that you tell me can be used against you in court. I said, you have the right to an attorney now or at any time during questioning. And if you cannot afford one will be appointed for you. And I said, if you do agree to talk to me, you can stop answering questions at any time during this interview. I said, do you understand? Oh, I understand. I said, okay, sign your waiver right here. He signed. Of course, it's being recorded. He signs, and he lies, and he lies, and he lies. He tells lies. And I said, okay. And I'd already printed off everything before they got there. I told him about Mrs. Kravitz. Of course, I didn't tell him who she was. And I printed off colored pictures of the ladies' jewelry at the pawn shop, his driver's license, colored picture, the Xbox equipment, and I said, there it is. Well, he just dropped his head. And I said, did you do it? He nodded his head. Of course, nodding your head is not good. I want to hear it. I said, did you do it? He said, I did it. And I said, end of interview. I turned my tape recorder off. And somebody says, good job, Sutton. It's not even 10 o'clock and you've already solved the felony that happened over the weekend. Good job. Really? You see, this man sitting in front of me just turned 17. In the state of Georgia, you don't go home with mama or daddy when you commit crimes. You get handcuffed and you get taken to the county jail. Most states, you're 18. In Georgia, it's 17. So I took my detective hat off and I looked at him. He dropped his head. And I put my daddy hat on. I knew what he was going to say. What I was fixing to ask. I knew what he was going to say. I've asked it for over 40 years, time and time and time again. I said, son, where's your daddy? Real large tears began to fall. He had on a gray t-shirt. I remember it like it was yesterday. I said, son, where's your daddy? He said, I don't know. I said, do you ever see him? I knew what he was going to say. He said, once or twice a year. I said, how long has he been gone? He said, Mama said he left right after I was born. I called the officer standing down the hall, uniformed officer that was sitting down there probably sipping on a cup. He come in, he stood him up, he handcuffed him, he let him out the front door, put him in the back seat of the car, and he goes to the county jail, mugshot, fingerprints, name in the paper, charged with a felony on his record for the rest of his life. And every time he applies for a job, there it is. 17. The officer led him out the front through the lobby. Mama cries. She comes in and says, can I talk to you? I said, sure. She sat down and cried. I shed a tear because I wasn't a detective anymore. I was daddy. She said, where'd I go wrong? I said, ma'am, you probably didn't go wrong. She said, I've worked 2 jobs this whole life just to keep a roof over our head. Where'd I go wrong? I said, ma'am, you probably didn't go wrong. I said, does he ever see his daddy? She said, oh, once, twice a year if he's lucky. When did he leave? She said he left right after he was born. Daddies. Daddies, do we understand the role, the position that we're in? Did we understand it when our children was born? Do we understand it, daddies, now? Young fellows that's in here that will be a daddy one day. Do we understand? You can tell I've been in this business too long. Being around young men and young women. And when I say I've asked those questions 1,000 times, I probably have. And if it wasn't for this book, I probably never would have asked those questions. Because Tommy stands up here and preaches it, other preachers preaches it, and us Bible class teachers, we teach it. About the importance of a good mama and a good daddy. And what God established in the garden. And what kind of role it plays in the lives of our children. And we may have grandparents in here that's raising your grandchildren. And if you are, God bless you. That's your greatest mission. It's not halfway around the world in India. It's not some other mission work, as important as that is, that Subligna Road may be involved in. God bless that. But those grandbabies and your children, it's your greatest mission field. It's been said that the 3 sweetest words in the English language are home, heaven, and mother. I guess us dads don't even contend for that honor. When poets and songwriters write about the sweetness of home, it seems that most of their thoughts turn to motherhood. And while mothers deserve all the praise they can get, I mean, where would we be? Where would our families be? And where would my family be? And where would the church be without our godly women? We'd be in a mess, is what we'd be in. But I wonder sometimes why little praise is directed to the Father. Is that because that we're less deserving? Or maybe we're just not as prominently involved in the lives of our children. Maybe that may be the case. I think it may be. But studies of male prisoners, inmates now, have shown this to be true. And that is this, that the most one thing that they have in common as an inmate is most of them, like give or take 90 to 95% of them that's incarcerated comes from fatherless homes. When working in law enforcement, one of the things that goes along with the job is sometimes we're around inmates and we're there 5 days a week, 6 days sometimes, and we're around them and we kind of get to know them on a somewhat personal basis. And if you do, occasionally around Mother's Day, some of them, they have a way of purchasing something online. They'll ask, can they borrow a few dollars? Some of them will. They want to send their mother a Mother's Day card, and that's nice. In over 40 years, you know how many inmates have asked me to borrow money to send a Father's Day card? Can you say none? Why? Most of them don't have one. And fathers, if this says anything to us who are fathers, it says that we play a very significant role in the lives of our children. And we must strive to be the fathers who take that responsibility seriously. Daddies, I really believe it's that simple. Listen, our children need our attention. Granddaddies, our grandchildren need our attention. You're important. When our children need us to look, and young men who's going to be daddies one day, when our children say, look, Daddy, look at this. If it's at all possible, we need to be standing there or sitting there looking. It's important to them. It's paramount to them. It's huge. And it doesn't matter if it's at school or at play or wherever it is. And I know that as our children grow, they're going to develop friendships and they're going to develop people who they may call their best friend. And as they get older, they'll make many friends, we hope, and that's good. We understand that. They may even have somebody they call their best friend. But daddies, let me say this. The friendship that we have with our children should not be rivaled by anyone. No one on this earth should take the place of the friendship or take the spot of the friendship, the good friendship that we have with our children. Even those, mothers, yes. But listen, brethren, this world is on its way to hell. And our children need to know that if this world was set on fire and their world is upside down and someone's talking about this or someone's talking about that and they're in school and they're really upset, listen, at the end of the day, if they know that they can count on you, then they're ahead of the game. In that sense, we need to be their best friend. They need to know, and mothers, this is us, this is you too. They need to know that they've got you, that you love them, and regardless of what goes on, daddies and mothers need to be in that position, that the friendship that we have with our children is not rivaled by anyone. And daddies, listen. God has placed us as the captain of the ship of our home. And we need to understand that. And listen, Kevin and Teresa didn't do it perfect. I promise you we didn't. I could tell you the mistakes that I made along the way. I guess we all could. But God has placed us as captain of the ship, and we need to step up and behave as godly women, a godly man. And women, we need to support our husbands in that. Not running interference, ladies. Not running interference. And taking over and trying to take over. Let us make the mistakes when it comes crunch time. When it comes to certain things. Because most time, us guys, we don't care what we eat. We don't care what color car we drive. We don't care about a lot of things. But certain things, when it comes to our families and stuff, God has placed us as the captain of our ship, and I'm talking about godly captains. Let me throw out a couple of disclaimers, and then we're going to dive into the book, and the lesson will be ours. The disclaimers. Some children are going to go their own way. Some of them may be thinking about Proverbs 22:6, that it says, "Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it." Brethren, that's a proverb. That's a truthful saying, and it's true in most cases. Proverbs. It's a proverb. It's not a 100% guarantee. Excuse me. I know some fine brethren, some fine Christian parents, and that by all accounts they raise their children right and properly, and these parents are heartbroken. Why? Because their grown children have left God. And sometimes parents can do their absolute best, and their children will choose to follow the devil. The influence of Satan that he has over this world is very strong. Disclaimer number 2, just because a grown boy or girl did not have an example for a good father or mother is no excuse. I met a fine gospel preacher really not too long ago, and he said, "I had the sorriest daddy in the world." He said, "But me and Mama, we made it." I said, "God bless you, brother." So not having a good daddy is no excuse. Now, Matthew 17, what was read earlier, primarily this story tells how Jesus, and we think about this, how Jesus miraculously heals a boy who suffers from epileptic-type seizures. But I believe behind the scenes of this, we can see that this is a story about a father who can serve as a model for us today. This story is also found in Mark 9 and Luke 9, if you're interested in that. And from all these accounts, we can get a good impression of this father, though we don't know his name, we don't know where he came from, or even what he did for a living, and really none of that matters, or God would have told us. It's what he does on this occasion that sets him apart as a father, and his actions are worthy of our imitation. Now notice here, beginning in 14, and when they had, Matthew 17, verse 14, and when they came together, a man, I'm reading from the ESV, a man came up to him, kneeling before Jesus, and said, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he has seizures, and he suffers terribly, for often he falls into the fire, into the water, and I brought him to your disciples, and they could not heal him." And Jesus answered, "O faithless and twisted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out, and the boy was healed instantly. Jesus took care of that. Point number 1 of this lesson. Listen, all those things that we don't know about the Father, but one thing we do know. The Father was there for His Son. Notice that we don't always know. We don't know that He was always there for His Son, because we only have this one isolated scene from His life. But as the story indicates, the Son often had seizures and fell in fire or water. So the Father had apparently seen this a number of times. So it stands to reason that He had spent time with him, a lot of time. So the Father was present and involved in His Son's life. And daddies, listen, do you know that's the number one craving that families have for Dad? That He be present? Daddies, listen, that when we come home, and mothers, when we come home, we're home. And we leave work at work. And we get off of that internet, or we get off of that couch, and we get involved in the lives of our children. Daddies, mothers, what if I could tell you that there's a way that I can guarantee you that your children will be 5 times less likely to commit suicide? 5 times less likely. This is true. Fact. I can guarantee it if we do this. The last one of those that I worked, I sat down with an extended family member. And I asked this extended family member that magic question. Because that person was absent from the scene. And it really had nothing to do with the investigation of this death. I asked this, the first question out of my mouth. I said, where's his daddy? He was in another state. Had nothing to do with him. Brethren, I'm telling you, that's why he was in there on that floor. It's critical, daddies, that we're involved in the lives of our children. What if I could guarantee you 5 times less likely for that to happen? 32 times less likely to run away. 20 times less likely for him or her to have behavioral disorders. 14 times less likely to commit rape. 9 times less likely to drop out of high school. 10 times less likely to use drugs. And 9 times less likely to end up in prison. Daddies, would you be interested in finding out the secret? Here it is. As the father, be sure you're present and involved with your children at home. That's it. The presence, because the numbers show that the daddies that do that, they're not here. The daddies that don't do that, that's absent, MIA, these numbers are here. Studies have proven that time and time and time again. The presence of the father in the home makes a tremendous difference in the future of your children. Daddies, listen to me. Don't let your overworking schedule steal away your quality time with your family, and especially your children. Daddies, listen. Your children had rather live with you in a tent with you than in a mansion without you. Well, Brother Sutton, you don't understand. I work night shift. I make 25 cents more on an hour. I know I don't see my kids during the week, but I see them on the weekends. I understand. We got to work. We do. But have you got to stay there? Brother Sutton, you don't understand. I got that new Ranger bass boat. I got that big payment. It's $400 something. I got to work all the overtime. I know I don't see my kids much. Brethren, you may just have to sell that boat. Well, Brother Sutton, you don't understand. Now, I get a new F-150 King Ranch every couple of years. I know they're $75,000, $80,000, but I got to work all the overtime I get and make that big truck payment. Brother, how about driving one with 200,000 miles on it for a while and spend time with your kids instead of working 6 days a week, 12, 14 hours a day? You may just have to sell that King Ranch. I had a sister not too long ago. She said, well, I'll tell you, Brother Sutton, we're going to go to Disney either once or twice a year, and we're going to go on this vacation, and he's going to work all the overtime he can get. Really? Daddies, mamas, listen, we only get them for a little while, don't we? Well, Brother Sutton, you don't understand. We got that new iPhone. What are we at now? 14, 15 iPhone 14? What is it? And they come out with that stuff for every year, and what do? We buy right into that, and we got to pay that $300 a month iPhone bill. I got to work all those. Really? Dr. Paul Faulkner illustrated it this way. He said that every once in a while, the illustration that he gave, every once in a while, we see on television or recorded, and they'll show this for 30 years if it ever happens. When it does happen, we can go back and pull it up on YouTube. Right at the end of the game, it's a 1 point. One team's behind 1 point, and it's right at the buzzer. And from one end of the court on basketball to the other, it could be rec ball, it could be college, it could be pro. Somebody just slings that thing, and it goes all the way down. It goes in the goal. Buzzer sounds, we win the game. And everybody just goes crazy, and that's really exciting, and that's good. But how often does that happen? It only happens occasionally. And when it does happen, we'll show that thing on television for 30 years. What about half court? It happens a little bit more frequently. But what if you're right under the goal, close to the goal? We can lay it in. They can lay it in almost 100% of the time. Brethren, it's the same way with our children. The closer we are to them, when we're loving them, the more apt they are not to be in some of the things that I've mentioned. They will be where they need to be for the most part. Just the importance of being there for our sons and daughters. Did you know that the most important predictor of criminal behavior is not race? It's not income. It's not even religious affiliation. The most important, most dominant predictor of criminal behavior is the absence of the father in the home. Studies have shown that time and time and time again. Time and time again. The importance of just being there. So be there, fathers. That's what I say. Be involved. Brother Sutton, what does that look like? Daddies, mamas, how often do we talk? Do we really sit down and have a conversation with our children? We talk to them daily. Do we ever sit down and have a real soul talk with our children? About there's a God in heaven and maybe they're just too young to obey the gospel, and we get that. But talking about God and how God loves them and how you love them. Why do I bring this up? Because that 1,000 questions and all in front of those young ladies and young men that I've asked those questions for, they didn't have that. They didn't have folks that would sit, a mom or dad sometimes, especially daddies, that would sit down and talk to them about God. Daddies, you ever went to them about school or hobbies, their likes and their dislikes? You ever talk to them about their friends? You better. I remember one time Jake was probably, me and Teresa still talks about this every once in a while. Jake was probably 5th, 6th grade. And there was a young man and his buddy at school invited him to come spend the night one Friday night. And we talked about it, and Tate was probably kindergarten, Jake was 5th grade. So me and Teresa, we just played detective. We got in the car. I knew about where they lived. And we rode down there just to check it out. We was playing detective. And we rode down this county road, way out isolated, and where this young man lived. And I understand that lonely shack on the side of the road can be the warmest, nicest home in the world. I get that. A lot of times it is. You ever see the movie Deliverance? If you haven't seen it, don't watch it. It's pretty bad movie. But if you have seen it, do you remember that? That's what that looked like. I bet there was 30 cars, junk cars around the house that maybe he was a mechanic. Junk cars, taking parts off of it. Had a dirt driveway, potholes everywhere. Still not the bad scene. But they was Pabst Blue Ribbon cans all in up and down that driveway. Teresa, with her big eyes, she just leaned over and looked. She said, "My baby ain't going there." I said, "No, he's not, is he?" Sometimes we have to play detective. Not overbearing, not lording over our children, but we got to be smart. Daddies, may I ask, how much affection do we show our children, our grandchildren? You know, in Matthew 19, the master teacher. In Matthew 19, beginning in verse 13, Jesus had children brought to him so that he might lay his hands on them and pray for them. Daddies, when's the last time that you ever laid your hands on your children and prayed for them right then and there, where they could hear you? And oftentimes we'll say, well, Jesus blessed the children. Yes, he did. Well, how did he do it? Well, it's in the verse. He touched them and he prayed for them. And what a blessing he was to the children. Daddies or mamas, are we a blessing to our children? Do we do that? I read something the other day that the more we hug our children, the smarter they become. Makes sense. My boys are 32 and 37, and Teresa and I, we didn't do it perfect. But we'll hug them today and tell them we love them. I don't care who's looking. They can take a picture. They can put it in a frame and put it on their wall at home. I don't care. Daddy, another question. I've got to move on. Daddies, how much Bible reading do you do with your children? Daily. I'm not talking about once a year. I'm talking about a regular scheduled Bible reading. Daddies, how often do you pray with your children? Daddies, may I suggest if you'll pray each night with your children and fill their minds with good thoughts by thanking God for them and telling God how important they are to you and telling God how much you love them and what all they mean to you. Daddies and mamas, listen, Our children will go to bed. They'll go to sleep 10 foot tall. The bed won't be able to hold them if we'll do that. Daddies, you ever taken your daughters on a date and show her how a real man should treat her? Do you talk to her about knowing the difference between a man who flatters her and a man who compliments her? There's a difference. When a man who views her as property and a man who views her properly. A man who lusts after her and a man who loves her. I remember when me and Teresa dated, I was driving a 77 Ford pickup, kept it spit shined all the time, she said, and I did, short bed. It did have hubcaps. And I would go up there to pick her up, and she told me later, maybe later in our dating, we dated a couple of years, maybe even after we was married, I'd pull up and get out and go in. I had to sit there and look at her daddy, right? And we should do that. But she told me later that she's always ready. She was in there in the back. And she said, I was ready before you got there. But she said, I was looking out the window and I'd see you coming around the curve. And she said, but I'd sit in there for 5 minutes. So she's making me sweat is what she's doing. And daddies be sitting there and young ladies listen to me. If that old boyfriend ever pulls up in the yard and blows the horn, don't you go out that door. You make him have enough respect for you to come in. And daddies, when they come in, be sitting there cleaning that shotgun, right? Cleaning the barrel of that shotgun. Ask him, would he like to hold it and look down at how clean the barrels are? Maybe you can tell him how smooth that thing will shoot. Of course, I'm being a little funny. Another point, I'm going to do this quickly. The father of our story that we read about, he was a good father because he came to Jesus for help. Fathers, do we do that? Do we come to God for help? Notice the story begins that a man came to him, kneeling down before him, and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son. What a father. The only time we meet this man, he's on his knees, pleading to the Lord on behalf of his son. Fathers, Paul said in Ephesians 6, verse 4, that you fathers bring them up in the training and the admonition of the Lord. And that's been God's will from the beginning. It is. Ephesians 6:4. And you fathers. Paul didn't say mothers. Even though they're included. That's huge. You fathers. We're the captain of our home. The ship of our home. And God lays that at our feet. To be the provider. The leader. To lead our family. And you fathers, provoke not your children to wrath, but bring them up in the admonition and the training and the admonition of the Lord. And I don't think I'll ever understand what all goes into that. It made me think of Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wives. Daddies and granddaddies, how are our grandbabies and how are our children going to know how a man should treat a woman unless they see you doing that to your wives? They won't know. Ephesians 5:25 says that. Husband, love your wives. Colossians 3:18. Husbands, love your wives and be not bitter. Ephesians chapter 5, down about verse 22. Wives, submit yourselves unto your husband. Ladies, how will our children and our grandchildren know how a godly wife is supposed to be if they don't see it in you? The point is, they won't. 85% of all youth in prison comes from fatherless home. 85%, and the numbers sometimes are 90 at some locations to 95%. 85% of children with behavioral disorders comes from fatherless homes. 75% of children who are in drug abuse centers comes from fatherless homes. 71% of high school dropouts comes from fatherless homes. Daughters without fathers are 711% more likely to become pregnant as a teenager. 90% of all runaways and homeless children come from fatherless homes. And I found this out too. A lot of times children ain't running to something. They're running away from something. How sad. 63% of youth suicides comes from fatherless homes. Daddies, granddaddies, even though granddaddies may not play as much as a prominent role, but we can. The question is, do we think our children are important enough to do that? Another point about this father, he was a good father because he had tenderness and compassion we read that where he said, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he's an epileptic and suffers severely. And in Luke's account, he said, Lord, I'm imploring you, I'm begging you. Notice the tenderness and compassion. And finally, the fourth point of the father, he said, finally, the father of our story was a good father because yet of his faith in Jesus. In Mark's account, Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible who believe. And this man responded, he said, Lord, I believe. He said, help my unbelief. You see, he believed that Jesus had the power to heal his son. That's the reason he brought him to him. But he also knew that his faith could be stronger, so he asked for a greater faith. I wish I had more time to cover a couple more things, but hopefully the lesson is ours in a good way. But daddies and mamas, none of this happened by accident. We got to be intentional being good daddies and good mamas. And we got to be good fathers, and we got to lead them daddies. We got to lead them to where we want them to go. You know, moms and dads, our home should be a fortress, a fort, a safeguard for our children. No matter how bad their days are at school, no matter how much your daughter or your son may have been bullied or talked about, and the things that they hear and see in this world, they've got to understand. They need to understand that, hey, if I can just make it home, it's going to be okay. That's the kind of home that God wants us. And I know I'm speaking to God's best here today. I understand that. But if they just know if they can make it home, mamas and daddies, listen. Don't let your home be a battlefield. Let it be a refuge. Let them see and hear God. I remember a man a number of years ago, he walked all over Adairsville. I've been there my whole life. I think he knocked on every door in town. And you know what his question was? Now, he was of a man-made religion, but he had a very good question. You'd open the door, he'd say, does Jesus live here? I thought to myself, what a good question. Does Jesus live in my home? Mamas and daddies, does your children know that Jesus lives in your home? I hope so. I hope so. And I was asked this question. I preached this sermon. I don't remember where I was at. I think it was right outside of Savannah. And this daddy, after services, he come up to me and he said, I was that guy. He said, I worked all the time. And he said, now my kids are just scattered, no longer faithful. He said, what can I do? I said, brother, first thing you can do is you can repent, like the rest of us have to do from time to time. I said, repent. I said, when you go out that door, I said, you call your children and you tell them that you messed up, that you fumbled a ball, and that you're going to spend the rest of your life being faithful and try to get them to be faithful. I said, that's what you do. And I said, if this was in a public way, I said, you respond in a public fashion and tell the church that you fumbled the ball. That's what we have to do. And I said, a good man will pray for you in the assembly of the church. And I said, God will forgive you. I said, he promises he will. And I said, you spend the rest of your days trying to fix what the results was of what you say that you did. I said, that's all any of us can do. Daddies, mamas, are you subject to God's invitation, not mine? If you are, you can come now as we stand and as we sing this song.